Have you ever stayed silent while someone tore your reputation apart? Because telling the truth would only hurt them more? I have. For 3 years, my father-in-law never called me by my name. To him, I was just the gold digger. Every Sunday dinner ended the same way. He'd glance at my wedding ring, lean back in his leather chair, and say, "Funny how some people fall in love right after finding out a family owns half the county." Everyone laughed. Well, almost everyone. My husband, Ethan, would stare at his plate like it held all the answers. And me? I'd smile, take another bite, and pretend it didn't sting. You know what's crazy? I could have ended the whole thing with one sentence. Just one. But I didn't. People probably thought I was weak. Truth is, I made a promise I wasn't willing to break. My father-in-law, Richard, was the kind of man who believed money revealed a person's true character. He built a successful construction company from scratch, and nobody respected hard work more than he did. Unfortunately, he'd already decided mine didn't count. It didn't matter that I worked full-time. It didn't matter that I never asked him for a single dollar. In his eyes, I had married Ethan for one reason: his money. "Give it time," he'd tell the family with a smirk. The mask always slips. I never argued, never defended myself, never even rolled my eyes, because deep down, I knew something he didn't, and I prayed he'd never have to learn the truth the hard way. But life has a funny way of exposing secrets, especially the ones buried beneath pride. And the day Richard collapsed in front of the entire family, everything changed. Richard didn't die that day. The doctors called it a mild heart attack. He was home within a week, and somehow even more convinced I was the problem. "Stress follows some people around," he muttered the first morning he was back. His eyes landed on me. Or maybe they bring it with them. Nobody said a word. Not Ethan, not my mother-in-law, Carol, not even Richard's daughter, Melissa, who had spent years trying to earn her father's approval. I just poured his coffee and slid the mug across the table. "Thanks," he said. Then, without looking at me, he added, "Doesn't make you family." Ouch. That one hit harder than I expected. Still, I smiled. "Fair enough," I whispered. On the drive home, Ethan finally broke the silence. "I wish you'd stand up to him." I looked out the window. And accomplish what? He'd have to listen eventually. I almost laughed. No, Ethan. He'd have to want to listen. That was the difference. Richard never asked questions. He made decisions about people before they ever had a chance to explain themselves. And once he made up his mind, good luck changing it. The funny thing, he thought he knew exactly who I was. A woman chasing the family fortune. Someone waiting for the day his company, his house, his legacy would somehow become mine. If only he knew. Every month, after paying our own bills, I quietly transferred money into an account no one else knew existed. Not for me, not for Ethan, for someone Richard loved more than anyone in the world. And if he ever discovered where that money came from, the truth wouldn't just surprise him, it would break his heart. Because the promise I'd made years ago was about to be tested in a way I never saw coming. A few days later, Richard invited the whole family over for what he called a serious conversation. Whenever he used that tone, nobody expected good news. Dinner barely lasted 20 minutes before he pushed his plate away. "I've been thinking," he said, folding his hands on the table. "It's time to start planning this family's future." Melissa smiled. Ethan straightened in his chair. I stayed quiet. Richard looked directly at me. "And that future won't include people who married into this family for the wrong reasons." The room froze. Ethan let out a frustrated sigh. "Dad, come on." "No." Richard's voice stayed calm, almost too calm. "Let's stop pretending." He turned back to me. "Tell me something. If Ethan lost every penny tomorrow, every dollar, would you still be here?" I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, because I already knew he wouldn't believe me. Richard smirked. "That's what I thought." Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Maybe we should change the subject." "No," Richard replied. "This conversation is long overdue." Ethan pushed back his chair. "She's my wife." "And that's exactly why I'm worried," Richard shot back. "You've always seen the best in people. I've seen enough." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. I slowly stood up and picked up the empty dinner plates. No dramatic speech, no tears, no argument. As I walked toward the kitchen, Richard called after me. "You can fool my son, but you'll never fool me." I paused for just a second. Then I quietly said, "I hope you're right." The kitchen fell silent. For the first time, Richard looked confused. Just for a moment. Because there was something in my voice that didn't sound defeated. It sounded certain. He couldn't have known that less than an hour earlier, my phone had buzzed with a message that made my hands tremble. The screen showed only one sentence. "The hospital called. We need to talk about Emma. Immediately." I stepped outside before answering the call. My hands were shaking. "Hello?" A familiar voice sighed with relief. "Mrs. Carter? This is St. Mary's Children's Hospital." My heart dropped. "Is Emma okay?" "She's stable," the nurse said gently, "but her treatment can't be delayed much longer." I closed my eyes. "I understand. We're only calling because your last payment came from your personal account. We wanted to make sure you still intended to continue." "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "I'll find a way." "I knew you would," she said softly. After the call ended, I sat alone on the porch steps. For almost 3 years, every extra dollar I earned had gone to Emma. Richard never knew she existed. Neither did Ethan. It wasn't because I didn't trust my husband. It was because I'd made a promise. A promise to Emma's mother. My college roommate, Sarah. The night before she passed away, she grabbed my hand and whispered, "If anything happens to me, don't let Emma grow up feeling abandoned." I promised, and I never broke promises. Not even when it meant selling my own car. Not even when it meant working weekends. Not even when it meant letting people believe I had married for money. Because protecting Emma mattered more than protecting my reputation. The next morning, I walked into work after another sleepless night. Before I could even sit down, my manager waved me into his office. "I've got good news," he said with a smile. "We're promoting you." I blinked. And there's something else. He slid an envelope across the desk. "There's a relocation offer in Seattle." My stomach tightened. The raise could change Emma's future, but accepting it might end my marriage. And before I had the chance to tell Ethan, Richard made a decision that would turn the entire family against me. That evening, I finally told Ethan about the promotion. His face lit up. "Babe, that's amazing." "It is," I said quietly. "But the job's in Seattle." His smile faded. "For how long?" "Permanent." Silence filled the room. "I can't leave Dad right now," he admitted. "Not after the heart attack." "I know." He reached for my hand. "We'll figure something out." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But life didn't wait. The next afternoon, Richard asked everyone to meet at the house. "I've updated my estate plan," he announced. Melissa looked surprised. Ethan frowned. Richard's eyes landed on me. "I've made one thing perfectly clear. Anyone who tears this family apart gets nothing." The words weren't directed at everyone. They were aimed at me. He believed the Seattle job proved what he'd been saying all along. "There it is," he said with a bitter laugh. "The money finally won." I took a slow breath. It isn't about money. The sheriff found Richard the next morning. He was sitting alone outside the old cabin, staring across the lake. "I just needed some peace," he said. Physically, he was fine. Emotionally, not so much. The doctor later called it stress mixed with exhaustion. For the first time in years, Richard agreed to stay home and rest. A few days later, Ethan asked me to pick up some paperwork from Richard's office. I wasn't even looking for anything. But as I organized a stack of unpaid invoices, a thin folder slipped onto the floor. Inside were notices from the bank. Overdue loans, missed payments, equipment the company could no longer afford. I froze. Richard's business wasn't thriving. It was barely surviving. Suddenly, everything made sense. His anger, his fear, his obsession with protecting the family fortune. He wasn't guarding wealth. He was terrified of losing everything he'd spent 40 years building. I quietly placed the papers back exactly where I'd found them. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was the hospital. "We received another payment," the billing coordinator said. I frowned. That can't be right. The balance was paid in full this morning. My heart skipped. I didn't send anything. There was a short pause. The payment came from a private trust. Before I could ask another question, she added one sentence that left me speechless. "The donor asked to remain anonymous, but they said you'd understand." "Sure it isn't." Ethan stepped between us. "Dad, stop." But Richard was already walking away. "You'll leave the second a better offer comes along." I watched him disappear down the hallway. For the first time, I almost told him everything. About Emma. About Sarah. About every paycheck. Every sacrifice. Every promise. The truth sat on the tip of my tongue. But a promise is a promise. So I stayed silent. 3 days later, Richard disappeared. No note, no phone call, nothing. Only his empty truck, parked beside an abandoned fishing cabin. Richard returned home quieter than anyone had ever seen him. The man who always had an opinion suddenly spent hours sitting on the back porch, saying nothing. One rainy afternoon, he called Ethan into his study. "I need a favor." "What is it?" "Ask your wife to stop paying for my medications." Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" Richard looked confused. "The pharmacy told me the bills have already been covered for months." Ethan blinked. "Dad, we never paid them." A strange silence filled the room. That evening, Ethan walked into our bedroom holding a small stack of receipts. "I found these in the mailbox." I glanced down. Every receipt carried my name. Prescription payments, medical equipment, follow-up treatments, all paid from my personal account. Ethan stared at me. "You've been paying for Dad?" I nodded. "For how long?" "Since his first heart attack." He looked completely stunned. "But why didn't you tell me?" I smiled softly. "Because he would have refused every penny the moment he knew it came from me." "For how long?" "Since his first heart attack." He looked completely stunned. "But why didn't you tell me?" I smiled softly. "Because he would have refused every penny the moment he knew it came from me." Ethan sat beside me, trying to make sense of it all. "He called you a gold digger." "I know." "He humiliated you in front of everyone." "I know." "And you still helped him?" I looked toward the window. "My mother used to tell me something. Don't let someone else's bitterness decide the kind of person you'll become." So, I didn't. The next morning, Richard accidentally overheard the last few seconds of that conversation from the hallway. He didn't hear everything, but he heard enough. For the first time in years, the man who had always been so certain started wondering if he'd been wrong all along. Richard barely slept that night. The words echoed in his mind. He would have refused every penny the moment he knew it came from me. The next morning, he walked into the kitchen earlier than usual. I was making coffee. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice I'd never heard before, he asked, "Can we talk?" I nodded. We sat across from each other. No family, no interruptions, just silence. After a long pause, Richard cleared his throat. "I overheard Ethan last night." I looked down at my coffee. I wasn't supposed to. Another silence. Finally, he asked the question I'd waited 3 years to hear. Why? I already knew what he meant. Why help a man who had spent years tearing me down? I smiled gently. "Because you were Ethan's father." He looked away. "I didn't deserve that." "No," I admitted honestly. "You didn't." His eyes filled with regret. "I judged you the day Ethan introduced you to us." "I know." "I never gave you a chance." "I know." "And you still never hated me?" I shook my head. hate would have been easier. Richard let out a shaky laugh that quickly turned into tears. For 3 years, I kept calling you a gold digger. I know. And all this time, you were protecting this family. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said everything. Richard covered his face with both hands. I've spent my whole life believing I could read people. He looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. I've never been so wrong. Just then, the front door opened. The entire family had arrived, completely unaware that everything they believed about me was about to change forever. Richard asked everyone to sit down. The room fell quiet. He looked at me first, then at the rest of the family. I owe someone an apology. Melissa frowned. Dad, what's going on? He took a slow breath. For 3 years, I called this woman a gold digger. Nobody moved. I judged her without knowing a single thing about her. Ethan glanced at me, then back at his father. Richard's voice cracked. While I was accusing her of chasing my money, she was quietly paying my medical bills. The room went silent. Carol covered her mouth. Melissa stared at me in disbelief. I thought money could tell me who people really were. He shook his head. I was wrong. I saw kindness and called it greed. I saw loyalty and called it manipulation. Then, in front of everyone, he did something I never imagined. He said, I'm sorry. No excuses, no pride, just 2 words. I smiled. I forgave you a long time ago. A tear rolled down Richard's face. You kept saying there was a truth you never told me. There was. I looked around the room. The truth wasn't about money. It was that I loved this family, even when it didn't love me back. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Some people think the greatest victory is proving someone wrong. They're wrong. Sometimes, the greatest victory is refusing to let someone else's judgment change who you are. And in the end, Richard finally knew the truth. It just took him 3 years to see the woman standing in front of him.